On the morning of April 1st, 1990, a highway patrol officer on an Arizona interstate accidentally discovered one of the most horrific crimes in American history. Inside a truck with flashing emergency lights, he found a naked woman chained up, with a horse bit stuffed in her mouth. But this was just the tip of the iceberg. For nearly 2 decades before that, this truck had become a mobile hell, where dozens of young women endured brutal torture before being murdered. Who was behind these crimes? And why did it take nearly 20 years to stop this monster? Welcome to the Case Files, where we explore the most shocking criminal cases, unsolved mysteries, and true stories that make you question human nature. Today, we're diving deep into one of the most complex and terrifying serial killer cases ever recorded in the United States. A case that spanned nearly 2 decades, with dozens of victims and mysteries that remain unsolved to this day. In this episode, we're taking a deep dive into the infamous case of the truck stop killer, the serial killer, and his bloody crusade across America's highways. Chapter 1. The fateful morning in Arizona. Dawn broke on April 1st, 1990, over the empty stretch of Interstate 10 near Casa Grande, Arizona. The desert air still carried the chill from the night before, and this highway typically saw very little traffic in the early morning hours. Arizona Highway Patrol Trooper Mike Miller was conducting his routine shift when he spotted a large semi-truck parked on the shoulder. What caught his attention wasn't just the truck itself, but the emergency lights flashing continuously, creating streaks of orange light in the dim dawn. Probably a driver with mechanical trouble, Miller thought to himself, and decided to stop and check. This was standard procedure for highway patrol officers, always ready to help motorists in distress. But as he got out of his patrol car and approached the truck, a vague sense of unease began to creep in. The sounds coming from inside the cab weren't the normal sounds of a broken-down vehicle. These were muffled sounds, painful moaning, the sound of metal clashing. Miller pulled out his flashlight and shined it through the cab window. The scene he witnessed would haunt him for the rest of his life. A completely naked woman was bound and chained, her hands and feet cuffed and chained to hooks hanging from the cab ceiling. In her mouth was a horse bit, a device typically used in horseback riding to control the animal. Her eyes reflected sheer terror when she saw the patrol officer's flashlight beam. "Jesus Christ," Miller muttered under his breath, and immediately drew his weapon. Chapter 2. Encounter with Evil. From behind the curtain separating the driver's area from the sleeper cab, a figure slowly moved. Robert Ben Rhoades, 44 years old, emerged with a pale face, but still trying to appear calm. He had an average build, brown hair streaked with gray, and particularly frightening cold eyes. Eyes that showed no emotion whatsoever when witnessing another person's suffering. "Sir, I need you to step out of the vehicle immediately," Miller shouted, his gun pointed directly at Rhoades. Rhoades tried to make excuses. "She's willing, officer. We're just role-playing." His voice was completely calm, as if he were discussing the weather. "Get out of the truck, right now." Realizing he couldn't lie his way out anymore, Rhoades slowly stepped down from the truck. Miller immediately handcuffed him and called for backup. When Officer Robert Gygax from the Casa Grande Police Department arrived to assist, they found the handcuff keys in Rhodes's pocket and freed the victim. The woman, later known by the alias Katie Ford to protect her identity, was 27 years old and in a state of complete panic. Her body was covered with whip marks, bite marks, and signs of systematic torture. She was immediately taken to the hospital for treatment, and then to the Casa Grande police station to give her statement. Chapter 3. The victim's horrifying account. At the police station, after receiving initial medical care and temporarily calming down, Katie Ford began telling her horrific story to Detective Rick Barnhart. The interview was recorded on video and later became crucial evidence. Katie explained that she regularly hitchhiked to visit friends around the country. The day before, she had asked for a ride at the Rip Griffin's truck stop north of Phoenix. Rhoades appeared as a normal trucker, polite and friendly. He invited her into his truck, saying he would take her to Los Angeles. He seemed very polite at first, Katie recalled with a trembling voice. He made normal conversation, asked where I was going, why I was traveling alone. I thought I was lucky to meet such a kind driver. But after being in the truck for a few hours, Katie felt unusually drowsy. She suspected the drink Rhoades had given her might have been drugged. When she woke up, she found herself pushed into the rear sleeper compartment with her hands and feet cuffed. I couldn't believe what was happening, Katie continued. He pulled out a briefcase and opened it. Inside were all these things: torture devices, whips, chains, metal clamps, and other things I can't even describe. Rhoades introduced himself as Whips and Chains, his CB radio handle. Over the next several hours, he tortured Katie using systematic methods, both beating and sexually assaulting her. He told me he'd been doing this for 15 years. Katie recounted the detail that sent chills down the investigators' spines. He bragged about what he'd done to other girls. He said I would never get out of there, that I would never. Chapter 4. Discovering the Houston Connection. Detective Rick Barnhart recognized the seriousness of the situation from the very first hours. He faxed a request to the court to hold Rhoades and immediately contacted the Houston Police Department, where the suspect lived according to his identification documents. The call to Houston revealed a terrifying truth. This wasn't the first time Robert Ben Rhoades had appeared in police records. Detective R.E. Bomar from Houston told Barnhart about a similar case that had occurred a few months earlier. In early 1990, an 18-year-old girl named Shauna Holtz had been kidnapped and held in Rhoades' truck for 4 weeks. She had her hair cut short and her pubic hair shaved, a distinctive signature that Rhoades left on his female victims. During her captivity, she endured systematic torture both physically and psychologically. Shauna was lucky to escape on February 5, 1990, when Rhoades carelessly failed to lock the handcuffs properly. She described the truck and perpetrator in detail to Houston police. When 2 officers brought her to identify Rhoades, she looked down at the ground and said that wasn't her attacker. "Why would she do that?" Barnhart asked. "We wondered the same thing," Bomar replied. Only later did she confess the truth. She was too terrified, afraid that if she identified the perpetrator, he would find a way to get revenge. After weeks of torture, her mental state was severely damaged. This information helped Barnhart realize they were dealing with a serial killer who might have been active for years. Chapter 5. Portrait of Evil. Robert Ben Rhoades was born on November 22, 1945, in Council Bluffs, Iowa, into what appeared to be a normal family on the surface. His parents were hard-working laborers, and he had an older brother. In his early years, Rhoades seemed like a normal child, even quite active. In high school, he participated in football, wrestling, and even the choir. Classmates remembered Rhoades as a fairly quiet young man, not particularly outstanding, but nothing especially abnormal either. However, as he entered his teenage years, the first signs of abnormality began to appear. At age 16, Rhoades was arrested for the first time for car theft. A year later, he was arrested again for assault. These were early warning signs of violent tendencies and law-breaking behavior, but at the time, they were considered typical teenage mistakes. In 1964, when Rhoades was 19, a horrific event occurred that may have been a key catalyst in developing his psychopathic psychology. Rhoades' father was arrested for sexually abusing a 12-year-old girl. This scandal shocked the small community of Council Bluffs and made the Rhoades family the target of disgrace and ostracism. Unable to bear the humiliation and pressure from the community, Rhoades's father shot himself to death the day before his trial was scheduled to begin. His father's death, combined with the sexual scandal, created deep psychological trauma in young Rhoades's mind. Immediately after his father's death, Rhoades joined the U.S. Marine Corps. Perhaps he hoped that military discipline would help him escape his painful past and find a new direction in life. However, the military environment couldn't change his already distorted nature. In 1968, after 4 years of service, Rhoades was dishonorably discharged from the Marines for theft. Being kicked out of the military in disgrace further damaged his already fragile self-esteem. Returning to civilian life, Rhoades once applied to become a police officer, perhaps as a way for him to seek power and prestige. But with his criminal record, his application was rejected. This rejection may have further nurtured his resentment towards society and law enforcement. Eventually, Rhoades had to work manual labor jobs: factory worker, restaurant employee, auto mechanic. But he couldn't keep any job for long. He frequently changed jobs, probably due to his difficult personality and abnormal behaviors. In the early 1970s, Rhoades turned to long-haul trucking. This was the career he would spend most of his remaining life in, and it was also the job that created perfect conditions for his crimes. Trucking allowed him to move continuously across the country, remain anonymous, and encounter countless vulnerable people on the highways. Chapter 6. Family Life and Suspicious Signs. In the 1970s, Rhoades married for the first time. He had a son, but the marriage quickly fell apart. His first wife never spoke publicly about the reasons for divorce, but close sources indicated she had discovered Rhoades's abnormal and frightening behaviors. Rhoades remarried 2 more times, but both marriages ended in failure. His third wife, in later statements to police, revealed terrifying details about married life with Rhoades. She said Rhoades had abnormal and violent sexual habits. He often forced her to participate in role-playing games where she had to play the role of a kidnapping victim. He used handcuffs, ropes, and other devices to tie her up, and frequently abused her during lovemaking. At first I thought it was just normal adult games, she told police, but gradually those games became increasingly violent and scary. He seemed to enjoy my pain more than the actual sexual act. The third wife also recalled that Rhoades was frequently away from home on long trips. When he returned, he often had strange items: makeup that wasn't hers, jewelry, women's clothing in various sizes. When she asked about these items, Rhoades always had evasive explanations, saying they belonged to female friends he helped on the road. Chapter 7. Mobile Torture Chamber. Hell on Wheels. Converting the truck into a mobile dungeon wasn't an overnight job. Rhoades had spent years perfecting his brutal masterpiece. The sleeper compartment behind the cab, originally a place for drivers to rest during long trips, had been transformed into a miniature hell. He installed hooks on the ceiling, specially designed to hang handcuffs and chains. This allowed him to tie victims in a stretched-out position, making them completely helpless and forcing them to endure the pain of hanging suspended for hours. A thick curtain was installed to completely separate the sleeper from the driver's area, ensuring that no one from outside could see what was happening inside. In the leather briefcase he always carried, Rhoades equipped himself with sophisticated torture devices. Besides basic items like handcuffs, chains, and whips, he had specialized tools like electrical clamps, razor blades, needles, fishing hooks, and many other devices specifically designed to cause maximum pain without causing immediate death. Particularly terrifying was that he always carried white towels. Survivors recounted that Rhoades often laid these towels under them before beginning torture, perhaps to avoid soiling the truck's interior or to make cleanup easier afterward. He also had a professional camera and always carried multiple rolls of film. Photographing victims during torture wasn't just for keeping mementos, but was also part of the psychological torture process. He often forced victims to pose in humiliating positions, and these photos were later used to threaten and control them. Chapter 8. Regina Walters, the tragedy of a 14-year-old girl. Among all of Robert Ben Rhoades' victims, the story of Regina K. Walters is perhaps the most heartbreaking and well-documented. Regina, only 14 years old, from Pasadena, Texas, had decided to run away with her 18-year-old boyfriend, Ricky Lee Jones, in late January 1990. This young couple, like many teenagers, was drawn to dreams of freedom and adventure. They decided to hitchhike to California, where they hoped to start a new life. Unfortunately, fate brought them face to face with Robert Ben Rhoades at a truck stop in New Mexico. Rhoades, with the appearance of a normal truck driver and a friendly attitude, convinced the couple to get into his truck. He promised to take them west, exactly the direction they wanted to go. Regina and Ricky, with youthful naivety, trusted him and stepped into the fateful truck. Ricky Lee Jones was murdered by Rhoades almost immediately. The boy's body was found later in Texas, dumped alongside a deserted road. But with Regina, Rhoades had a different plan, a much more brutal one. Regina was held captive in Rhoades' mobile torture chamber for weeks. During this time, the 14-year-old girl endured indescribable torture. Rhoades not only sexually assaulted her, but also systematically abused her psychologically. One of his most cruel acts was cutting off Regina's beautiful long hair. For a 14-year-old girl, hair isn't just part of appearance, but part of identity and self-worth. Cutting her hair wasn't just physical torture, but a deep violation of the victim's dignity. After cutting her hair, Rhoades forced Regina to wear a black dress and high heels, items he had probably taken from other victims. He then took multiple photographs capturing the girl's despair and pain. Chapter 9. Torture Calls and Tragic End. While Regina was being held captive and tortured, Rhoades began another form of psychological torture, this time targeting the victim's family. In March 1990, about a month after Regina went missing, her father, Robert Walters, began receiving strange phone calls. A strange man's voice on the other end told Mr. Walters, "I cut your daughter's hair." The voice was completely cold and emotionless. "The girl is at a farm. She's learning." Mr. Walters, in a state of panic and desperation, tried to get more information, but the caller always hung up after saying those words. These calls continued for several weeks, each time plunging Regina's family deeper into pain and worry. The FBI later determined that these calls were made from payphones along the routes Rhoades had traveled, based on his driving logs. This was important evidence connecting Rhoades to Regina's disappearance. Finally, after weeks of torture, Rhoades murdered Regina. Her body was found in September 1990 at an abandoned warehouse in rural Illinois. The method of killing showed extreme brutality. Regina was strangled with a steel wire, and the perpetrator had twisted the wire many more times than necessary to cause death, proving he took pleasure in watching the victim die slowly. Chapter 10. Major Investigation and Undeniable Evidence. After arresting Robert Ben Rhoades in Arizona, the FBI quickly got involved with a large-scale investigation. Agents realized they were dealing with one of the most complex serial killer cases ever recorded, with nationwide scope spanning many years. On April 6, 1990, just 5 days after Rhoades was arrested, the FBI executed a search warrant at his home in Houston, Texas. From the outside, Rhoades' house looked completely normal, a modest single-story home in a middle-class neighborhood. But what was found inside shocked even seasoned FBI agents. The master bedroom had been turned into a museum of crime. On shelves and in closets, the FBI found hundreds of items belonging to women: clothing in various sizes, makeup, jewelry, belts, shoes. These were clearly trophies that Rhoades had collected from his victims over many years. Particularly horrifying was finding multiple white towels, some still stained with dried blood. This confirmed survivor testimonies about Rhoades laying towels before torturing them. But the most important discovery was the photographs. The FBI seized hundreds of photos showing women in various states of captivity and torture. The photos of Regina Walters were the clearest and most complete, showing the entire process from when she was captured to her final days. One of the last photos of Regina, also the most haunting, showed her standing in an abandoned warehouse, the same place her body was later found. In the photo, Regina with her hair cut short, wearing the black dress, both hands raised in a posture of fear and resignation. Her eyes looked straight into the camera lens, containing indescribable despair and horror. Chapter 11. Analyzing driving logs and expanding investigation. The FBI obtained Rhoades' detailed driving logs, an important document that by law all long-haul truck drivers must maintain. This log carefully recorded every trip, times, locations, miles driven, and rest periods. Experts at the National Center for the Analysis of Violent Crime, FACAP, at FBI Quantico, spent months analyzing this log. They cross-referenced Rhoades' travel schedule with missing person reports and unidentified bodies found along highways across the country. The results of this analysis were terrifying. There were at least 50 cases of young women who went missing or were murdered at locations and times that matched Rhoades' schedule. These victims were typically teenage to early 20s females who were hitchhikers, runaways, or prostitutes, people whose disappearances often weren't reported immediately or didn't receive special attention. The FBI also discovered that Rhoades had a very systematic pattern of operation. He typically operated in areas with many truck stops, where he could easily find potential victims. He favored routes with little patrol presence and remote areas where bodies could be easily disposed of. Chapter 12. Other victims and criminal pattern. As the investigation expanded, the FBI identified many other Rhoades victims. Another typical case involved the young married couple Patricia Candace Walsh, 24, and Douglas Scott Ziskowski, 28. In November 1989, this newlywed couple left Seattle to hitchhike to Georgia, where they planned to do missionary work. They were devout Christians who believed they had a mission to spread the gospel. Unfortunately, they encountered Robert Ben Rhoades in Texas. Like the case of Regina and Ricky, Douglas was murdered almost immediately. His body was found in January 1990 near Ozona, Texas, but wasn't identified until 1992. Candace was kept for torture for months before being killed. Her body was found in October 1990 in Utah, but wasn't identified until 2003 through dental records. Rhoades' pattern was very clear. He targeted young couples who were hitchhiking, immediately killed the males to eliminate resistance, and kept the females to satisfy his sick desires over extended periods before killing them. Dumping bodies in different states was a calculated tactic to complicate investigations and avoid detection of connections between cases. Chapter 13. Trial and Final Justice. With a mountain of undeniable evidence, prosecutors built a solid case against Robert Ben Rhoades. However, bringing him to trial wasn't a simple process due to the interstate nature of the crimes and their occurrence across multiple states. The first case brought to trial was Regina Walters' murder in Illinois. Faced with photographic evidence, DNA, and driving logs proving he was at the exact location and time, Rhoades and his lawyers realized that pleading not guilty was hopeless. In September 1992, to avoid the death penalty, Robert Ben Rhoades agreed to a plea deal with prosecutors. He pleaded guilty to first-degree murder in Regina Walters' killing and received a life sentence without possibility of parole at Menard Correctional Center in Chester, Illinois. During the hearing, when the judge asked if Rhoades wanted to say anything before sentencing, he just stood silent with a completely emotionless face. No apology, No sign of remorse, no emotion whatsoever. That was the most frightening thing about Robert Ben Rhoades, his complete lack of ability to empathize with other human beings. Chapter 14. Unresolved Crimes. Years later, justice continued with other cases. In 2005, Rhoades was extradited to Utah to stand trial for Candace Walsh's murder, but at the victim's family's request, charges were dropped in 2006 so they wouldn't have to testify multiple times. In March 2012, at age 66, while serving his sentence in Illinois, Rhoades was once again brought to court in Texas. This time, he faced charges for murdering the couple Walsh and Ziskovsky. Once again, to avoid the death penalty, he agreed to plead guilty and received another life sentence. Prosecutor Steve Smith, who had pursued this case for years, described his feeling when facing Rhoades in court. "I've been a prosecutor since 1979, and this was one of the rare occasions when I was in court where the defendant walked in, and you could feel the evil. The hairs on my arms stand up right now talking about it." But prosecuting Rhoades didn't stop there. Investigators continued studying unidentified photographs, unsolved cases, and remaining clues. They knew Rhoades had left behind a brutal legacies, and families were still waiting for answers about their missing loved ones. Chapter 15. Unsolved Mysteries. Today, more than 30 years after Robert Ben Rhoades was arrested, the FBI continues investigating him. Among the photographs found at Rhoades' house, there are still many images of women whose identities remain unknown. Each photograph tells a tragic story. Some woman who was once someone's daughter, sister, friend, but now remains only a nameless face in criminal files. FBI Special Agent Bob Lee, who spent much of his career investigating Rhoades, shared, "Every time I look at those photos, I feel pain. They're not just evidence. They're real people with real lives, with families who are suffering. We have a responsibility to identify them and bring peace to the families." One of the most notable cases involved an image of a woman who appeared to be held captive in Rhoades' truck. In 2019, a Canadian woman named Sherry happened to recognize herself in photos released by the FBI. She contacted the FBI and told her story about encountering Rhoades in 1985 while hitchhiking from Calgary to Las Vegas. "I was lucky to survive," Sherry shared. "But for many years, I tried to forget what happened. When I saw those photos, all the horrific memories came flooding back. But I knew I had to speak up to help other families, Chapter 16. Impact on Transportation Industry and Society. The Robert Ben Rhoades case had far-reaching effects on America's trucking industry. Trucking companies began implementing stricter background checks for drivers. GPS tracking systems were installed widely, not just to monitor cargo, but also to supervise driver activities. The American Trucking Association issued new regulations about safety training and professional ethics. They also established hotlines for reporting suspicious behavior. For the hitchhiking community, the Rhoades case became a bloody warning. Many nonprofit organizations were established to educate young people about potential dangers when hitchhiking, especially with strangers. Sarah Stillwell, founder of the organization Safe Travels, shared, "We don't want to make people paranoid, but they need to know that people like Rhoades can still exist out there. Education and vigilance are the best weapons for self-protection." Chapter 17. Other Serial Killer Drivers. Sadly, Robert Ben Rhoades wasn't the only case of a serial killer operating in the transportation industry. The FBI estimates there are about 25-50 serial killers active on American highways at any given time. One other known case is Keith Hunter Jesperson, nicknamed the Happy Face Killer for his habit of leaving smiley face symbols at crime scenes. From 1990 to 1995, he killed at least 8 women across the United States. Bruce Mendenhall is another case, arrested in 2007 after killing at least 4 women. He also turned his truck into a hunting tool. Dr. Eric Hickey, a psychologist specializing in serial killer research, explained, "Long-haul trucking creates ideal conditions for those with homicidal tendencies. They can move continuously, maintain anonymity, access vulnerable victims, and most importantly, have private space to commit crimes without interference." The FBI established the Highway Serial Killings Initiative to monitor and investigate similar cases. They estimate that about 500 murders annually may be connected to truck drivers or killers operating on highway routes. Chapter 18. Robert Ben Rhoades Today. Currently, Robert Ben Rhoades, 79 years old, is still serving his life sentence at Menard Correctional Center in Chester, Illinois. He will never be released and will likely die in prison. Throughout more than 30 years, he has never shown signs of remorse or emotion regarding his crimes. Prison staff describe Rhoades as a model inmate. He follows regulations, doesn't cause trouble, and lives a quiet life. But this doesn't diminish his potential danger. According to psychological experts, psychopathic killers like Rhoades never truly change. They just learn to hide their true nature better. He refuses to participate in most interviews with media, researchers, or police about unsolved cases. This silence only increases the pain for victims' families, who are still seeking answers about what happened to their loved ones. Chapter 19. Legacy of Pain and Lessons. Learned. Robert Ben Rhoades' story leaves many painful lessons for society. It shows the importance of reporting violent and suspicious behavior, no matter how minor. It also emphasizes the need for an effective federal information system to connect cases occurring across multiple states. For victims' families, the pain never truly heals. Robert Walters, Regina's father, died of a heart attack a few years after his daughter was murdered. Many believe the pain of losing his child contributed to his death. Cases like this change how we see the world, Dr. Janet Warren, a forensic psychology expert, shared. They remind us that evil can hide in the most ordinary places, and vigilance is necessary to protect ourselves and our communities. Chapter 20. Unnamed Victims Still Remembered. To this day, the FBI continues receiving calls from people who recognize friends or relatives in photos found at Rhoades' house. Each such call opens another tragic story, another family finally learning the fate of their loved one. The FBI's Cold Case project continues operating actively, using modern technology like DNA analysis and facial recognition to identify unknown victims. They also call on the public to provide information about any relatives who went missing between 1975 and 1990, especially young women. Every victim deserves to be named and receive justice. FBI Special Agent Mike Lewis, currently in charge of the project, stated, "We will never stop seeking answers for these families." One of the most recent discoveries occurred in 2019, when a Canadian woman named Sherry recognized herself in photos released by the FBI. She contacted the FBI and shared her story about encountering Rhoades in 1985, once again confirming that his criminal activity may have lasted longer than we know. The story of Robert Ben Rhoades, the truck stop killer, is one of the most horrific cases in American criminal history. For nearly 2 decades, he turned the highways, symbols of freedom and opportunity, into routes of death and suffering. More than 50 families have had to endure the pain of losing loved ones to Rhoades' brutal hands. Young girls like Regina Walters, only 14 years old, endured indescribable torture before being released by death. But amid this darkness, we also see the light of courage. Survivors like Shauna Holtz and Katie Ford bravely stood up to testify. Police officer Mike Miller saved a life and ended a long chain of crimes. FBI agents tirelessly sought justice for the victims. This story reminds us that evil can hide in the most ordinary places. It also shows us the importance of staying vigilant, trusting our instincts, and not hesitating to report suspicious things to authorities. If you enjoy exploring shocking true crime cases and real stories that make people think about human nature, subscribe to the Case Files channel so you don't miss upcoming episodes. Hit like if you found the content useful and share with friends so we can explore history's most mysterious cases together. Especially if you have information about any missing person cases between 1975 and 1990, particularly young women on highway routes, please contact the FBI. Your information might help a family finally find answers. And always remember, vigilance is the best weapon to protect yourself and your loved ones. Trust your instincts. See you again in the next episode of the Case Files, where we'll continue exploring unsolved mysteries.